Hi, I'm Space Kate and welcome to Need to Know Space. Now this is a special video I'm doing because we've had some very big space news in the last 24 hours. It's really big and important news, but perhaps not for the reasons that you may think or may have read in the newspapers. What am I talking about? It's the decision, of course, by NASA to bring back the astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, not on the Starliner crew capsule that they flew up to the International Space Station on, but instead on SpaceX's Crew Dragon. What this means for the astronauts is that rather than coming home in the next few days or weeks, they will in fact become part of the next ISS expedition crew and will stay up there for a further 6 months, returning with the remaining members of Crew 9 in February 2025. Now, originally, Crew 9 would have been made up of 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut on the spacecraft going up. They are now reducing that crew size to just 2, and that allows there to be free seats for Butch and Suni to return with them in February and do so safely. Now, this is a really big decision. You may have seen a headline that now says, "Astronauts stranded on space station for a further 6 months." Well, no, this is not true. They have been assigned to the next expedition crew and will be staying there for an extra 6 months, but they have a ride home. That has been planned, it's been decided which vehicle that will be, and that's how they'll be getting home from space. So they're not stranded. These are professional astronauts, test pilots. They knew when they took on the mission, the crewed flight test of Starliner, which, let's remember, was a test flight of that vehicle. They knew what risks were involved, and they knew that there were multiple contingency plans for them if anything should go amiss. They are both trained up, they're veteran astronauts, and they've got all of their certifications. The training is up to date for robotics, for spacewalks, and for research. In fact, while they've been up there in the last couple of months, they've already taken part in over 100 hours worth of research on 42 different experiments. So they are not wasting their time up in space. And by the looks of some of the pictures I've seen, they are very, very much enjoying being up there on that orbital space station with those incredible views of Earth. So this is something that they have trained for, this is something that they were prepared for, perhaps maybe not expecting, but it's all done in the name of safety. So you may think the big story here is they're stranded, stranded. Oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever. Has anybody ever stayed in space for 8 whole months? Well, yes, they have. In fact, the average length of a stay on the International Space Station is 6 months, but we have had astronauts and indeed cosmonauts who have stayed on the space station for a year, and they've done that to do extensive testing, see how the human body works in a longer duration flight, and that's all interesting information and research that can be used for future missions. So it's not completely unusual. It's not something that hasn't ever been done before. It's not something that they weren't prepared for. This is something that they knew was a possibility, and now they've had it confirmed that they will be staying and making up part of the next International Space Station expedition crew. What we haven't had confirmed yet is which 2 of the original Crew 9 crew members will not be going up into space on the Crew 9 Dragon, which is due to launch no earlier than the 24th of September. Now, I would imagine, based on the fact that there are probably contractual obligations between the American and Russian space agencies, they've got a seat swapping agreement. So I imagine that whichever of the astronauts is told to stay home, I imagine the cosmonaut will probably still maintain their seat, because it's important for both agencies to even up the crews and make sure they have the right number from each country on board the space station at any one time. And if you bumped off the cosmonaut, that would start to throw some of the planning out of whack. So personally, and I don't think it's been confirmed as yet, but my money would be on them keeping the cosmonaut on board and selecting one of the other astronauts to be that second person in the Crew Dragon capsule. When that goes up to space, they will take with it some extra spacesuits, some SpaceX spacesuits, so that Butch and Suni have those for the return journey in February. So what happens to Starliner now if it is up there and it's not going to be bringing back Butch and Suni? Well, they have been working hard. They know that the vehicle can return without a crew. That does involve tweaking some of the software, changing some of the parameters in the software, and all of that work, I'm assuming, has been going ahead, because that'll take a lot of testing, ensuring they've got all the parameters right, and then that will return to Earth without a crew on board. So an uncrewed return of that spacecraft will happen, I imagine, in the next few weeks, early September. Hopefully, that will show that the craft itself was fine to return home. But of course, if for any reason these thrust issues, that they just weren't quite able to overcome their concern about the risk that one of those or several of those thrusters would have a catastrophic failure or something that would put the astronauts in danger, hopefully it will return safely, and they will continue to look at that data and see if they can produce models for future to work out what exactly that problem was. Now, in the press conference, we heard from all NASA representatives. Boeing was not on that call, and that was explained by NASA, saying that this was a NASA decision that they had made. Boeing had handed over the decision to NASA for them to decide whether they wanted to return the crew on Starliner or on Dragon, and they apparently voted unanimously that Starliner should come home uncrewed, and that they would bring the crew back with the Crew 9 in February next year. But they did say it was a close call. There were many people bringing up lots of different ideas, and I think in a different scenario, there is a chance that they perhaps would have allowed them to come home on Starliner, even though they couldn't completely quantify all of the risks. The reason I believe that they have not done that is twofold. One, they actually have an alternative. They have an alternative American space vehicle that has been tried and tested, is operational, and is ready to go for them to bring them back, in a way that they know or believe is the safest way they can do. That has never been possible in the past. That is the beauty of the commercial crew program, having two providers to deliver astronauts to and from the International Space Station. Now, I realise it's not optimal that on this flight test, the second of those providers has not been able to complete the crewed flight test and get certified for that, but it does sound positive that Boeing will continue to support the Starliner program, and NASA are ready to work with them and are still very, very keen to have that dissimilar redundancy. That means that if one of those vehicles had an issue for any reason at all, they would be able to use the other one as a backup vehicle and bring crews safely home, which is exactly what they're doing in this situation. That's quite an exciting moment, having two different crew capsules available. Okay, one is not yet certified, but the fact that there are two, I think that's pretty exciting for America, isn't it? They've never done that before, and it's incredibly rare for astronauts to go up to space in one vehicle and come back down in another. In fact, it's a question I was asking earlier. Apparently on Expedition 6, the astronauts went up on the space shuttle and returned in the Soyuz, but I can't think of any other examples. If you know some, please let me know in the comments. I'd be really glad to hear them. So the other thing you may have heard was that this is SpaceX heroically coming in to collect the stranded astronauts, and SpaceX is a hero and Boeing is the bad guys, and they've failed completely. And what you have to remember is there are real people working on these programs. I happen to know some of those people. I know how much they care, not only about about space, but about safety, about the crew that are on board. These are people that have worked with the astronauts. These are people who care deeply about their safety and would never want to do anything that would risk their lives. I think it's going to be a huge blow for them. Boeing, it sounds like, were far more confident with their data analysis. They felt that their vehicle would be safe. NASA has verged on the more conservative side, but you can totally understand why. The second reason, I mentioned they do have the option to use Dragon, but a lot of these people have the experience of working on programs where there have been disasters. Challenger and Columbia, where voices were not necessarily heard, that the safety was not at the forefront, and they've learned those lessons a very, very hard way. I think with all the publicity around this, with all of the uncertainty from the data, they just weren't quite sure enough that it would be absolutely the safest option, especially when there was Dragon on the table as an option. So a lot of these people have that experience working on those programs, and that has definitely, as they admitted in the press conference, has affected the way they have viewed this, and safety has to come first. As NASA Administrator Bill Nelson said, safety is our North Star here at NASA. So it's been a tough decision for them to make, but we know, or we certainly hope, that Butch and Sunny will now come home safely on Dragon. Although this is spaceflight, and every time somebody gets in a space capsule, they are taking a risk. It's inherently risky, but that's the job that they do. The key thing is minimizing the risk and ensuring that everybody is able to get home safely and reunite with their families, who I guess have been going through the ringer a bit with all the coverage, and will now have to cope with their loved ones being up in space for a further 6 months. Butch and Sunny are coming home to Earth on a Dragon capsule next year after spending a further 6 months on the International Space Station and forming part of the next ISS expedition crew. But what does that mean? What questions does that leave us with? Well, it means that this flight test, this crewed flight test, has not been completed. They haven't managed to prove that the Starliner vehicle could safely bring back astronauts to the ground. Now that raises some interesting questions about how Boeing will get Starliner certified for human spaceflight. I'm unsure at this point whether data collected from an uncrewed return to Earth will be enough to satisfy NASA that it's okay to put a crew on the next flight of Starliner, but these are all questions that are going to have to be looked into. Also, it's interesting to note that this is a fixed price contract. Boeing have been paid a fixed price to deliver a service. Now, what I think could be interesting is if Starliner returns to Earth safely, nominally, everything is fine, could they argue then that it was NASA being overly conservative that prevented them from completing this test flight, which was one of their mission objectives, one of the things they have to do to get human certification? And would they then argue that NASA has to pay extra for the additional tests if they're required? Or does this all get bundled in and we say, it was a fixed price, you go away, fix it, and we'll certify it when you deliver something that we are sure that works? I'm sure somebody will be looking at details of contracts to try and work that out. I've heard in the media some people are already calling for Boeing to be cancelled. You know, let's get rid of them from the space program. These are not people who understand the space program.
Just speaking on behalf of millions, why does NASA continue to fund Boeing?
What is your question?
Why do we continue to fund Boeing? What's the problems when SpaceX?
Is your question, why does NASA continue to fund Boeing?
Yes.
Yes.
For the obvious reason that, number one, we need 2 spacecraft to have the redundancy in case one is not available to take crew to and from the International Space Station. Number 2, this is according to an arm's length contract, and a contract that is a fixed price contract. And number 3, Boeing has been a great partner for NASA over the years. As a matter of fact, the big Space Launch System, the SLS rocket, is overall managed by Boeing, and there has been a long history with Boeing. The fourth reason is that they were the successful bidder along with SpaceX, because we had wanted to. So for all those reasons, that's why NASA does business with Boeing.
So I'd also like to add, Boeing operates the space station for us as well as the prime contractor for space station, and that's in its 25th year. So we have a long and storied history with them there also.
I think the key word is partner. A lot of people want to focus on the contractual relationship where we're buying something from a company. This isn't completely like that, right? I mean, we have a contract with Boeing, but it's to work together to develop this capability for our country.
Some people are also asking whether Boeing will actually have the money to continue investing in Starliner.
Senator Nelson, how certain are you that Boeing will ever launch Starliner with a crew on board again?
100%.
100%.
Correct.
There is no shadow of a doubt in your mind. Can you explain why?
Because of what this panel has already told you. The extensive cooperative working relationship between NASA and Boeing, of finding the problem, but knowing that the uncertainties are what held up the crew getting on Starliner to go home, and a certainty on my part that we will find out the uncertainty, and Boeing's willingness to carry through on this program.
As Administrator Bill Nelson said, spaceflight is risky. Even in the safest and most routine missions, there is always going to be a risk, and it was their prerogative to ensure that the risk was as small as it could be and ensure the safety of those crew members.
You know, when you're charting new paths for exploration, there are highs and lows. We all know this. It's part of exploration and moving forward. Spaceflight is hard. The margins are thin. The space environment is not forgiving. And we have to be right. We all know this. This was a tough problem to be solved, and a decision had to be made. I want you to remember, Starliner is a robust vehicle with excellent flying qualities, as evidenced by the manual demonstration accomplished by Butch prior to docking. And Starliner has performed exceptionally well overall, so please don't lose sight of that. This is a test flight, and the thruster issue and the associated investigations will pay huge dividends in the future for human exploration in a great way when Starliner flies again. I am encouraged by the dedication and resilience both the NASA and Boeing ground teams and, of course, our space flyers exhibit.
We heard that it's been a long summer for all the engineers, flight directors, all the people involved in Starliner, both at NASA and at Boeing. They've been working closely together, creating tests, researching the issues, trying to get to the bottom of what exactly had caused those issues with the thrusters. At the end of the day, it appears that it came down to some very complex physics that weren't quite understood about the way that the Teflon seal was expanding, and they weren't sure just how many times they were able to activate the thrusters on the way down from space without that causing an issue. There was also some concern that previously unseen drastic failure of a thruster could occur, and that was just a risk that NASA didn't feel they were ready to take. I'm sure this will be a huge blow to everybody at Boeing. I know they've been working very hard on this, and I think as a space community, we need to be supportive of everybody who is striving to create the progress that we all want to see. And I'll leave you then with the words of Ken Bowersox in this press conference.
We've had two good partners, Boeing and SpaceX, when it comes to commercial crew. And when they have problems, we don't just throw rocks at them or tell them that we don't like them. We work with them to get through those problems.
I have heard already on social media there have been some rather nasty, rather hateful comments going to Boeing employees who've now since locked down their accounts to prevent people talking to them and you know, personally attacking them, which is just not cool. This has been a difficult decision for everybody. Safety has to come first. Let's see what happens when Starliner returns from the space station. I'm sure there will be a lot of eyes on that return mission. And let's hope in future that whatever changes need to be made, they can understand the physics and fix those problems. Let's hope that there is a bright future for Starliner and for all of human spaceflight. That's all from me for now. Until next time.